You remember Imhotep, right? That evil villain from the mummy movies who killed a bunch of people and used magic scrolls and magic words to bring about a mini-apocalypse in Egypt? Well, if you think about it, the man was actually not a bad guy, at least not in the first movie. Like, he didn't want to rule the world or release an army of mummies to take over. All he wanted, even before he was killed, was to just be with the love of his life. And even as an undead mummy, all he wanted was to bring her back and live with her happily ever after. Or take Frankenstein's monster, for instance. Even he really wasn't a bad guy. Just a soul that was not supposed to exist. Similarly, from Megatron to Bizarro and Doc Ock to Harvey Dent, there have been countless cartoon villains who haven't been inherently evil. And in this video, that's exactly what I'm going to talk about. Top 10 cartoon megavillains who weren't really bad guys. Let's begin, shall we? Megatron, Transformers 1. There's probably no one who fits the whole not really a bad guy template more than D16, later known to his world and many others as Megatron, named after Megatron Prime, his hero. See, at the beginning, he was a Cybertronian miner with a good heart, a strong sense of fairness, and a pretty solid belief that Cybertron could become better if people followed the system. He was brave, loyal, and protective, especially toward Orion Pax, who often dragged him into trouble. D16 saved Orion more than once, and he also had enough basic kindness to stop himself from insulting B-127, also known as Bumblebee, even though he clearly found B-127 odd and annoying. So yes, there was good in him, but there was also a bit of weakness. You see, the problem was that D16 placed way too much faith in order. He believed leaders had authority for a reason, and even when the system was broken and unfair, he tried to accept the rules, which is solely the reason he respected Sentinel Prime and believed his rule would someday make Cybertron better. Needless to say, when Sentinel was exposed as a traitor and the cause of their suffering, D16's whole worldview broke apart into a million pieces and more. And once it broke, it didn't heal. D16 went from having this, well, blind faith in leadership to a hatred of anything he thought was a form of control. But then again, he didn't stop believing in hierarchy, in the sense that he still believed that those with power had a very justified right to stand above others, to rule over, and control them. So in a way, his old faith became slightly more rotten and corrupted. But look, the signs of who D16 would end up becoming had always been there, and you just need to look back to find them. It may sound like friendly banter, but it could have been an early sign of his personality. After the truth about Sentinel came out, D16 was left furious and rather cheated, which is what pushed him over to the dark side, the Decepticon side. And this simple miner managed to kill Sentinel, who, by the way, was stronger and more equipped than D16 in every manner. But D16's rage overpowered Sentinel in every possible fashion. After killing Sentinel, he took Megatronus's cog, placed it in his own chest, and rechristened himself Megatron before turning Highguard into Decepticons. As Megatron, his old idealism became an insatiable thirst for control over everything. He wanted order, and was prepared to get it even through the use of force, and anyone who opposed him became an enemy, even B-127 and Elita. So much so that when Orion tried to stop him from executing Sentinel, D16 did let his former friend fall to his apparent death. But Orion came back as Optimus with the Matrix of Leadership. Megatron was shocked in the beginning, but fury and rage were all that was left in him. And even in defeat and exile, he didn't think he had done anything wrong. He thought he had his reasons, and that those reasons were justified, even if a bit morally gray. Magneto, X-Men, the animated series. Magneto is yet another great example of how a villain could not be entirely evil. I mean, he didn't like it. Wake up one day and start with the notion of mutant supremacy? No. Eric had been a first-hand witness of just how evil mankind could be, and a childhood filled with nothing but trauma watered the seeds of negativity into a jungle of hate and dictatorship. You see, his Jewish family had been captured by the Germans in World War II, and although he survived, he had judged humans forever. Later, he started working at a hospital where he met a young Charles Xavier, and although momentary, the two shared a close friendship. But then Nazi soldiers attacked the hospital, and both men used their powers to save the patients. While Eric wanted the Nazis dead, Charles wanted mercy for them. Now, this was the first blow to their friendship. I mean, this difference of opinion. But Eric's hatred not only originated in the trauma he had sustained for years, but in reality, Eric had become what he hated. Years later, after Eric started going by the name Magneto, he had become determined that mutants, or Homo superior, should in fact be the superior race. He attacked factories, military bases, power plants, and government sites because he wanted to weaken human society before a mutant takeover. Xavier stopped him once with telepathy, and Magneto vanished for years, only to come back stronger and more in control of his powers. After he destroyed a village with his powers, his wife Magda became afraid and fled without telling him that she was pregnant. She later had Pietro and Wanda before her death, while Magneto was left heartbroken by her loss. And this was the strange thing about him. He could be brutal, but he was not without a heart. This man felt things, and he felt them deeply, and he was ready to help even those he had a difference of opinion with, as long as they were mutants. For instance, when Beast was in prison, Magneto came to free him, but Beast refused Magneto's help because he believed his trial could help mutant kind, and Magneto dismissed him as a fool. But as I said, Magneto could be brutal, and once he even attacked a military base and launched its nuclear weapons. The storm stopped the missiles. But yeah, in his attempt to get mutant kind a better life, he often made mistakes. For instance, he sided with Apocalypse, but of course, that was a major folly on his part, although it was one that he later rectifies. So in effect, Magneto was basically a product of his upbringing, and his personality was the sum of how others treated him in his growing up years. And I think that if the whole Nazi business hadn't happened with Eric, he might have become one of the greatest heroes Marvel ever saw. Mr. Freeze, Batman the Animated Series. Unlike most other villains from Batman's Rogues Gallery, I must admit that Mr. Freeze has the rare distinction of not being entirely evil, and probably the only other person who can be put in a similar bracket is Harvey Dent. But let's focus on Mr. Freeze for a moment. See, this guy wasn't a man who committed crime for the heck of it. He was a scientist who had lost almost everything, and his whole life narrowed down to this singularly painful goal of saving his wife Nora, who had become infected with a deadly disease. And although he didn't enjoy violence, he would even commit murders if it came between him and his goal. But I still think of Victor Freeze as one of the more tragic Gotham villains. In his definitive origin story, Freeze's research was abruptly cancelled, and the research is terminated by his ruthless employer, Ferris Boyle. When Freeze tried to protect the cryogenic chamber keeping his wife alive, a scuffle ensued, causing an explosion of sub-zero chemicals. The chemicals mutated his physiology, dropping his body temperature drastically and making him unable to survive in normal room temperatures, and in order to stay alive, Freeze was forced to construct a specialized climate-controlled environmental suit and developed cryoweaponry to help him in his goals. Before the accident, Victor was a reserved scientist who wanted to avoid conflict. But after the accident, Mr. Freeze became cold in every sense of the term. He kept people at a distance, spoke only when he had to, and often answered others with his piercing, silent stare. He rarely lost control, and he almost never let emotion slip through his cold, dark, and hard facade that the man had built around himself. But Nora was the obvious exception. Whenever she came up, the frozen wall he had built around himself cracked a little, because she was the one person he still loved unquestionably. And maybe this is how Freeze can sort of be considered to be a demented variation of Batman himself. Maybe a version of Batman where he's pushed beyond limits. Both men had suffered great loss. Both men seemed dark and withdrawn. and both had a purpose that originated in all the pain they had endured. But while Batman had rules, Freeze did not. Batman could understand Freeze's grief, but he couldn't allow him to kill people in the name of love. And maybe this made the situation worse, because like Batman would not hesitate from fighting someone unhinged like Penguin or Joker, but because Batman knew about Freeze's pain and how there still was a human buried underneath all that icy rage, Batman always found it slightly more difficult to deal with Freeze and his antics. Instead, he tried to make amends and announced a charity in Nora's name on live TV. After 50 years, he still loved her. Skeletor. Now, Skeletor's multiverse story did something genuinely interesting. Because, you see, in He-Man and the Masters of the Multiverse, the hero who saved reality was not Prince Adam or some version of him. Against all odds, it was Keldor, the Skeletor of Anti-Eternia. And see, this part becomes very crucial, because Anti-He-Man had been corrupted by Grayskull's power and wanted to spread anti-truth, which would have allowed him and the Dark Gods to reshape reality as we know it. Or more like, as they knew it. The He-Force reached the nexus of all realms and helped push back that threat, but the real surprise was Keldor and what he did next. In his world, Keldor did not become the usual evil Skeletor that you and I know oh so well. He searched the castle on Anti-Eternia and accepted that even if he had to sacrifice himself against Grayskull's forces, the journey would still be worth it. He fought Anti-He-Man, while the He-Force faced the Dark Gods, and then he joined his power sword with Anti-He-Man's sword to become He-Skeletor. Prince Adam found Castle Grayskull and the sword, then became a hero using this very path. And as for Keldor, well, he had none of the Masters of the Universe by his side. I mean, he had no Tila, no man-at-arms, and definitely no sorceress to help or guide him. Naturally, the man had to face destiny alone, and he even lost half his face in the process. The dark side kept tempting him with wealth and power, but he refused it because he wanted to be the one Skeletor who rejected corruption, no matter the cost, no matter the odds. That was why every He-Man, from Space He-Man to the Filmation version, saw him as the most heroic version of himself. As He-Skeletor, he destroyed the Dark God's portal and saved everyone. He even comforted the dying anti-He-Man because he understood that all that this villain ever wanted was just order. So yeah, at least one version of Skeletor was not inherently evil.
Selenius.
Hordak, She-Ra, and the Princesses of Power. Hordak from She-Ra and the Princesses of Power was not a difficult villain to understand once someone looked beyond his present and into the past. See, the series made it crystal clear that he was a clone of Horde Prime, and at some point, he had been one of Prime's generals, which only meant that he must have had a favored place in Prime's heart, if at all Prime had a heart. But the thing is that as soon as Horde Prime realized that his clone was not perfect, all the favor and favoritism went down the drain, and Hordak was sent to the front lines to die. Because to Horde Prime, well, let's just say he didn't like defects. Now, Hordak believed the defect was physical, especially since his body had begun to deteriorate and needed some mechanical adjustments to survive. In Light Spinner, when he could not grasp a loose piece of machinery, the look on his face said everything, like how he felt shame or how he hated this newfound weakness. And whenever he couldn't hide his condition, what followed was anger. But as the series progresses, it becomes exceedingly clear, or at least very likely, that the said defect may not originate from a physical weakness, but from his free will, or the lack thereof. But this made his Etheria mission much sadder, at least for him. Hordak wanted to prove himself to himself. Like, he wanted to know for himself that he had some value left in him still, which is why he wanted to conquer the planet and open a portal to contact Horde Prime. That's all. There was no wet dream about building empires. All Hordak wanted was to force Horde Prime to admit that he was wrong, that he had judged Hordak wrong. But let's also note that Hordak didn't really have a childhood either. The scenes from his past show clones in tubes with adult bodies, which meant Hordak had likely been born as an adult, which in turn means that he didn't have any family or friends while growing up, and by extension, it means that he did not have a normal life or any chance of growing out of the person that Horde Prime wanted him to be. No family, no friends, no normal life, no chance to become a person outside Prime's control. It got so much worse that at one point, Horde Prime literally looked through Hordak's emotions and memories and found out that Horde actually loved Entrapta. But Horde Prime saw even this as disobedience, and he then punished Hordak for having free will, free emotions. Needless to say, a man brought up under such conditions was never meant to be a good guy. But maybe things would have been a bit different had Hordak been treated right, even slightly right. Harvey Dent, Nolanverse. Although the Nolanverse Harvey is a Batman villain, I feel he totally fits the template here, maybe better than his animated series appearances. So Harvey Dent in The Dark Knight was once the White Knight, and there's no denying it. And that's the singular reason why his manipulation at the hands of Joker and his fall from grace worked so well in the story. But see, the film also had a strange problem with him, so much so that Nolan almost wrote two Harveys at once, albeit unintentionally. One was Gotham's perfect White Knight, a noble public hero whose fall had to be hidden so the city could keep faith. The other was a far more flawed man, a politician with controversial decisions in his past, a boyfriend whose relationship with Rachel was complicated, and a reckless figure of authority who often kept others in the dark, and even acted like he was above others. And don't even get me started on his hurting suspects before proving their guilt. At first, Harvey had all the right ingredients for a hero. He was brave, idealistic, and fearless enough to risk his own life against someone as cruel as the Joker. His hatred of corruption originated in childhood trauma because his father, a retired cop, used to abuse him as a child, and the police had failed him and his mother. But even before he became Two-Face, there were cracks in his shining armor, and you could see darkness slip through it. He was exceedingly cruel towards criminals like Lau and Thomas Schiff, and his confidence often bordered on arrogance. Like, he genuinely cared for Gotham, yes, but he also believed in his own judgment way too much. And once Rachel died, all these negatives took over him, and all his better parts effectively ceased from guiding his decisions. After Rachel's tragic death, Harvey was left with grief and anger, and in time, shock took over the man, so much so that he was now obsessed with payback, even if it meant killing everyone involved, even the good guys like Gordon, or even himself. The White Knight, the incorruptible Harvey Dent, took a huge dent from Rachel's death, and after the explosion, he saw himself as half dead, and he essentially became a smug, bitter person with a murderous rage to punish people. But yeah, he didn't even wish to escape justice in the end. Like, he had given himself entirely to his cause of retribution, and it seemed like he didn't wish to escape only because of a certain sense of justice that remained within him. He was, after all, two-faced. He had a good face and a bad one. He was partly good and partly evil, which is why Harvey Dent will always be the textbook example of a Batman villain who was not entirely evil.
Longer for vital safeguards, but I was determined. Nothing would stop me.
Dr. Octopus in modern portrayal. I think the singular reason why Dr. Octopus, aka Otto or Doc Ock, has a complex relationship with Spider-Man and doesn't seem as vile and evil as men like Green Goblin is that he has some goodness in his heart, albeit a little amount. See, Peter Parker has always had a lot of issues in his life, and I'm talking about issues that went beyond fighting his villains. His romances fell apart, his money problems were another issue, and his career was shaky as well, to put it mildly. So whenever a villain would attack Peter in his private space, the damage done would always be super personal. But Otto Octavius usually didn't try to do that with Peter, and the reason behind this could originate in Otto's own childhood. So the man had a difficult childhood, thanks to a difficult bond with his overbearing mother. He could be cruel, proud, and extremely dangerous, of course, but his human side was way bigger than his other evil colleagues. His feud with Peter wasn't only about hatred or strife for power, but often about two broken men who were forced to fight a fight about pride, pain, and sometimes purpose. In Spider-Man 2, Alfred Molina's Otto was initially a good man before his fall from grace and into the hell of crime. His bond with Peter gave the conflict an emotional edge, and by the end, Otto was brought face to face with the extremely disastrous results of his unchecked ambition. He realized his power had corrupted him, accepted his mistakes, and chose to do the right thing in his final moments. In fact, in the Superior Spider-Man arc, Otto swapped bodies with Peter, but after inheriting Peter's memories and connections, he understood for real how with great power came great responsibility, and strove to do the right thing, and even fought as Spider-Man along with other heroes like Daredevil and Miguel O'Hara. And I don't think that guys like Green Goblin or Kraven were far less likely to be this way. Shadow the Hedgehog, Sonic. Shadow was actually studied under Project Shadow, a secret gun research program from over 50 years before the events of the movies, and his life had been changed while he was still inside this project, which only meant that his freedom to make his own life choices had been taken away from him. Back then, Shadow grew close to Maria Robotnik, the young granddaughter of Professor Gerald Robotnik, who led the project. Maria was the one person who gave him some degree of warmth and affection, and it was only because of her that Shadow found some meaning in life. But then Gunn issued an arrest warrant for Gerald, who tried to escape along with Shadow and Maria, but Maria died after a soldier shot a tank filled with Shadow's chaos energy, which caused an explosion. Of course, Shadow was left broken on the inside. After that, he was kept in stasis for 50 years. When Gerald woke him, he wanted to use Shadow as a weapon of revenge for Maria's death, which is what brought Shadow into conflict with Team Sonic. And yeah, you must at this point know that Shadow was like really angry, and that he blamed the entire world for Maria. But more importantly, he hated Gunn for its role in her death and his long imprisonment, and also resented Commander Walters for what happened that day and for keeping him locked away for like half a century. But Shadow was never as heartless as he seemed, and although he caused pain to people he blamed, he still had his limits. He was confused when he realized he had seriously hurt Tom Wachowski instead of Walters. And when he saw Sonic at Tom's bedside, he had to face the memory of Maria again. Later, when Sonic gave in to rage, Shadow saw a mirror of himself and said that they had become the same. Yet he also called Sonic out for leaving his family behind for the sake of revenge, which only shows that family was still important to Shadow even after all his loss. Curtis Connors, aka Lizard, MCU. Dr. Kurt Connors was a brilliant geneticist at Oscorp and at one point a mentor to Peter Parker, and his goals and intentions were far from evil. In fact, he didn't become evil even after he became the Lizard, at least not when he was still in his human form. He wanted his research to help people regrow lost limbs and damaged tissue. In fact, he wanted to change millions of lives, and yes, he hoped that for himself as well. But then pressure from Oscorp basically turned his dream into a disaster. In 2012, his superiors tried to test the serum on military veterans while also seeking a cure for Norman Osborn. But the serum had not yet reached such advanced levels. Connors felt cornered by this pressure and used himself as the first human test subject. The serum initially worked, but not for long, as it started to change him into a mutated human-reptile hybrid. But what was worse was that as Lizard, Kurt lost his mind as well. He developed this very animalistic instinct and wanted to breed more of his kind to take over the world. A voice inside his head, likely the Lizard himself, pushed him further and convinced him that more serum meant salvation for everyone. After his first fight with Spider-Man, he found out Peter's identity, which made him Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man's first major enemy in the Amazing Spider-Man stories. Eventually, Spider-Man stopped him at Oscorp Tower and cured him of the Lizard persona and mania. After that, Connors was placed in custody, but in Spider-Man No Way Home, Kurt continued to be his former self, and he was cynical about MCU Peter Parker's plan to cure the villains. He even refused to enter Happy's apartment. Once everything fell apart, Lizard mocked the MCU Peter and hurled him back inside to face the Green Goblin. But still, I can say that Connors retained traces of humanity. He warned MCU Peter that his good intentions were going to have consequences and joked a bunch when he was not being all cold and weird. Bizarro, DC. I really believe that Bizarro is nothing more than a super tragic member of the Superman family. You see, a lot of versions have portrayed him as someone who had power, but didn't really know what to do with such power because there was no one to guide him or help him wield this power. He often wanted to help, but his mind processed the world in an extremely warped fashion, and as a result, he came off as someone dangerous, even if his heart wasn't really in the wrong place. So maybe he would have made more sense as an ally to Superman, or maybe as his dependent rather than his enemy. In fact, in some versions, Clark even sees him almost like a brother. So, that was all in this video, guys. If you liked it, please feel free to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvelous videos. Stay safe and have a good one.